The central and peripheral nervous systems. The purpose of this video is to cover aims and objectives, Learning Outcome 9, AC 9A to 9D. Learning Outcome 9 wishes for you to understand the structure and function of the nervous system. We'll cover the structure and function of the CNS, describe the functioning of the peripheral nervous system, describe the functioning of the autonomous nervous system, and explain the relationship between the nervous system and the endocrine system. So what is it all about then? Our nervous system allows us to respond to both the external environment that our animals live, but also to that of changes within the body. Take a couple of minutes to consider what you think the nervous system does. The basic functions of the nervous system are to receive what we class as stimuli from both the external environment but also the animal's internal structures of the body, to enable these stimuli to be analysed and utilised, and to then produce the appropriate response to the said stimuli. What is it made up of? A well-integrated body system that works well as a whole. We do need to split it down into easier to understand aspects. The central nervous system, which is made up of the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, and these nerves are provided by the central nervous system. Our autonomic nervous system consists mainly of visceral motor nerves, broken down into two further aspects: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And when we're talking about visceral motor nerves, we're talking about those that relate to the body. They supply things such as the cardiac muscle, the smooth muscle, and also glandular tissue, such as that of the liver and pancreas. Nervous tissue. The cell that we associate with the nervous system is termed the neuron. Neuron cells are responsible for nerve impulses to be transmitted throughout the nervous system, and below is an image of said neuron. The basic structure and function of a neuron is that each and every neuron consists of basic parts. You need to be aware of these parts and the vital functions that they perform. We have a cell body that contains the nucleus of the cell. Dendrites are made up of fine aspects that lead to shorter processes called dendrons. These aspects carry nerve impulses towards the cell body, and they receive these from other neurons. We have a long process termed as an axon. They carry nerve impulses onwards and away from the cell body. Nerve impulses from dendrons are directed across the cell body and continue down the axon, and nerve impulses travel rapidly. The basic structure and function of a neuron. The speed of the transmission along the axon is actually increased by the presence of what we term a myelin sheath, and it's made up of lipoproteins. It's made by Schwann cells that surround the axon, which are white in appearance, and this is why we see some of the more visible nerves within the body, and you may have seen these if you have been watching procedures in theatre. We have intervals of 1 mm spaces occurring between the Schwann cells, and these are called the nodes of Ranvier, and this provides the tissue of the axon with oxygen and a nutrient supply. The sizes and shapes of neurons will vary. We class the diameter as micrometers, and the length depends on the destination of the nerve fibre, and this can be a few millimeters to a metre long. So how do they work? The passage of nerve transmission from one neuron to another happens through the structure we term as synapses, and this is where the axon terminates. The nervous pathways are made up of neurons and synapses to allow said transmission to take place. The tissue associated to the brain and nervous system is classed understandably as complex nervous tissue, and this is made up of neurons that are supported by connective tissue and also neuroglial cells. Where an axon terminates on an individual muscle fibre, the synapse is referred to as a neuromuscular junction, and the nerve impulse will stimulate the muscle fibre to contract. As the nerve impulse travels down the axon, the vesicles move towards what we class as the presynaptic membrane. They release a transmitter into a synaptic cleft, and this diffuses quickly across. It makes the membrane excitable and allows the nerve transmission to continue down the nerve fibre. So how is a nerve impulse generated? We can consider it as an electrical phenomenon. Said impulse changes the electrical charge of a neuron by affecting the negative charge of the cell and its contents, and the positive charge of the cell membrane, thus affecting their relationship. Results in the permeability of the cell being changed, and after the impulse has passed for a short period of time, it is termed as refractive. It can't be reactivated by another impulse until permeability of the cell returns to normal status, and this ensures that the flow of impulses only travels in one direction. The central nervous system, or CNS as we commonly call it. During the development of an embryo, the formation of what we call a neural tube takes place. It is formed from the ectodermal layer of the inner cell mass of the embryo. It runs along the dorsal surface of the embryo, and while development takes place, peripheral nerve fibres grow out laterally and extend to all body parts. The anterior end becomes the brain, and the remaining tube becomes the spine. The brain. The function of the brain is to coordinate and control the normal functioning of an animal's body. It's classed as a hollow, swollen structure that lies within the cranial cavity of the skull to protect it from damage. In many species, we can break the brain down into three distinguishable areas: the fore, mid, and hind brain. The forebrain consists of the cerebrum, the thalamus, and the hypothalamus. The cerebrum takes up the greater part of the forebrain, and it contains 90% of all the neurons within the entire central nervous system. The right and left hemispheres are linked by something called the corpus callosum, and the right and left hemispheres are the two sides of the brain. The hemisphere's surfaces are deeply folded, enabling a large surface area to be contained within the cranial cavity, which itself is quite small. This also allows nutrients within the cerebrospinal fluid to reach cell bodies and neurons that are lying deeply within the brain tissue. The folds actually have appropriate terms. So we have the gyri, which are upfolds, sulci, which are shallow depressions, and fissures, which are deep crevices. The forebrain, made up of two hemispheres that we've already stipulated, the right and left, and these are divided by the longitudinal fissure. Each hemisphere consists of 4 lobes, and each of the 4 lobes contains specific centres or nuclei that have specific functions related to conscious thought and action. The tissue is made up of an outer layer termed grey matter, and that is also known as the cerebral cortex, an inner layer that's termed white matter, and that's made up of tracts of myelinated nerve fibres that link from each other. The thalamus is found deep within the tissue of the posterior aspect. It has an important function in relation to analysing and processing information that it gleans from the sense organs, and then to relay and send it on to the cerebral cortex. The hypothalamus lies ventrally to the thalamus and has several functions. It makes links between the endocrine and central nervous system by secreting a series of releasing hormones that are then stored in the pituitary gland. I would like you to utilise your textbooks and also the internet to research the further functions of the hypothalamus and upload those onto one file for your veterinary education list to mark. Ventral structures within the forebrain. The pituitary gland. is an endocrine gland attached below the hypothalamus by a short stalk, and this is marked on the image using the X. The olfactory bulbs are in a pair form in the most rostral area of the brain. The function is that they are responsible for the sense of smell, or olfaction. The size depends on the sense of smell in a species. So, for example, fish have a large pair of bulbs due to having a very good sense of smell. In humans, they are small. Due to the cat having a better sense of smell in comparison to the dog, theirs are much larger than that of the dogs. The arrow indicates the optic chiasma, which is associated with the nervous impulses that are carried by the optic nerve. These are carried onwards from the right eye, they pass into the right side of the brain, and then onto the left side via this optic chiasma. Thus, this also takes place for the left eye, and it's designed to ensure that information gleaned from both eyes reaches the brain. The midbrain is a short length of brain that lies between the fore and hindbrain. It's overhung by the cerebral hemispheres, so it's not so easy to see. Its function is to act as a pathway from the aforementioned parts of the brain and is responsible for carrying the senses of sight and hearing. The hindbrain is made up of the cerebellum, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. I'd like you to research the three aspects stated above and make your own notes relating to their functions. Please upload this onto one file for your veterinary educationalist to mark. So how is the brain protected? We need for the brain to be protected to function in a normal manner due to the aspects already covered in today's lecture. The brain is essential for maintaining life. To do so, we need to ensure the brain is appropriately protected. There are several structures involved in doing so. Mind map how you think the body has provided its own means of protection for the brain. So what structures are involved in protecting the brain? We have the cranium, the ventricular system, the meninges, and also the blood-brain barrier. So how do they protect the brain? You have an associated task to complete in order to fathom out how these stated structures have the purpose of protecting the brain. Please complete the task as depicted in the adjoining handout and upload this onto one file for your veterinary educationalist to mark. The spinal cord, a glistening tube that is white in colour. It runs from the medulla oblongata to the level of the 6th or 7th lumbar vertebra. At the point of this 6th and 7th lumbar vertebra, it is broken up into a region that we term the chorda equina. On leaving the skull through the largest foramen within the body, which we term the foramen magnum, this runs through the vertebral canal, and it's formed by interlinking vertebrae that play a key part in the protection of the spinal cord. It decreases in size cranially to caudally, and within the developing embryo it is classed as developing in a segmental fashion. The spinal nerves leave the vertebral canal through an aspect that we term the intravertebral foramen. If you were to perform a cross-examination of the spine, you would see the following. A central canal. This leads away from the ventricular system and contains cerebrospinal fluid. Grey matter. This forms what we term a butterfly-shaped core, and this tissue surrounds the central canal. White matter. This surrounds the grey matter, and it's organised appropriately into fibre tracts, taking information to the brain. So these are ascending tracts, and then away from the brain in descending tracts. We also have protection. We have the 3 meninges here, arranged in a similar fashion to those that surround the brain. We do have space within the dura mater and the periosteum of the vertebra. We term this the epidural space, and this is the site that we can utilise and apply or introduce local anaesthetic in a format that we term regional anaesthesia. The peripheral nervous system, made up of all the nerves that are provided from or by the central nervous system. It includes nerves that leave the brain, which are called cranial nerves, and nerves that leave the spinal cord. These are spinal nerves. There's a mixture of a small amount of nerves leaving the brain, but the majority are from the spinal cord, and we term this the autonomic nervous system. The cranial nerves. There are 12 pairs. They arise from the brain, and the majority actually supply structures within the head region and are relatively short nerves. Others supply body structures that are a reasonable distance away from the head, such as the vagus nerve or the cranial nerve. They're referred to by the name and also a Roman numeral for identification. And they will carry the following. Some will only carry sensory fibres, so from organs to the brain. Some only carry motor fibres, so from the brain to the organs. And some are mixed, which will carry both types. The spinal nerves. It's important that we remember that each segment of the spinal cord gives off pairs of spinal nerves to its correlating vertebra. They're numbered in relation to the number of the spinal vertebra in front. So if you think back, you will remember that there are 7 cervical vertebrae. However, there are actually 8 cervical nerves. The autonomic nervous system. We class it as a basic reflex arc. Within the autonomic nervous system, we have the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. A reflex arc is a fixed involuntary response to certain stimuli where the response is always the same. It's rapid and automatic and only uses nerves in the spinal cord. We produce a prompt response to potentially dangerous occurrences to help to protect the animal. Can you think of such an incident? Common reflex arcs in the dogs and cats are withdrawal or pedal reflex, anal reflex, patellar reflex, panniculus reflex, and the palpebral reflex. Another more unusual reflex that you don't as such need to be aware of because it relates to horses is the thoracolaryngeal reflex. Please research what takes place in such a reflex arc and also the significance of the area where these reflexes are and how we can utilise them in veterinary practice. Please note that reflexes can be unconditional, unconscious and automatic, or conditioned. Reflexes. They are unconscious and will occur even if the spinal cord is not functioning, i.e. even if it is severed. If a dog would have the webbing between the toes pinched and it were to respond by withdrawing the foot and responding by vocalising or by trying to harm the person who carried out said pinching, we can see that this indicates that pain has been felt. There is a conscious perception. Unconditional reflexes. These are unconscious and automatic. They can't be overcome. Conditional or conditioned reflexes. These can be overcome by conscious thought because they are learned. So Pavlov's dog is an example of a conditional reflex. We have covered Pavlov's dog before, but here is a reminder of how such conditioned training is used for training purposes. The patellar reflex arc. As we can see, this is a simple reflex arc. In this image, the sensory fibre is being stimulated by the tendon hammer. The impulse travels via the sensory nerve to the ventral horn of the grey matter and basically results in a muscular contraction. This is a basic image showing how a basic reflex arc works. The autonomic nervous system is considered to be entirely made up of visceral motor nerves. It supplies the cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glandular tissue. It includes the liver and pancreas, of all the internal organs, and of blood vessels. The system is under unconscious control. It can be divided into two parts, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic and parasympathetic. The division into the two areas of the autonomic nervous system is based on what we term how they are atomically derived in relation to the associated spinal nerves and their differing effects. Most organs are supplied by both types, and control involves there being a balance between the two. The sympathetic nervous system is the system that we relate to the dynamic of fright, flight, and fight, and it's the means of protecting oneself from harm. The parasympathetic nervous system is generally deemed to oppose the actions of the sympathetic. It's often distributed within the cranial nerves. We have a sacral outflow of this aspect of the nervous system, and it innervates the pelvic organs, i.e. the bladder and also the genitalia. This image nicely sums up what can take place in relation to the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. And as you can see here, the two systems actually really do clearly oppose each other. So we can see while the sympathetic would dilate the pupil, and it would make the animal act in the fright or flight system, the parasympathetic would constrict the pupil and would actually make the animal more likely to feed, breed and rest.